Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, May the 29th, 2020. It is currently 9:51 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, located here in Ovalo, Texas. Well, we have a lot to talk about in this hour, and I hope that you will listen carefully because I'm going to be trying to make a very important spiritual and theological application to something that is happening in our world right now. So we're going to try to take something that is happening, something that's definitely not good. A lot of things could be said about it from a political perspective, from a cultural perspective, but I want to look at it, try to understand what is happening. I may make a few comments about it, but what I'm ultimately going to do is take it and then look at it and see what spiritual lessons we can learn from it, how we can be challenged to think about this from a spiritual or theological perspective, all right? And hopefully you understand that, because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to complete this episode, and then my email inbox is going to fill up going, wait a minute, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about that? And it's like you missed the whole point. You missed the whole point. So that's why I wanted to start with at least trying to offer that explanation. But I hope that you will pay attention. If possible, have a Bible nearby, because we will definitely be doing a reading of a lot of scripture in this episode. All right. So let's start with some news, because this news describes what is going on. And then we're going to take that and then we'll turn that into a theological and biblical discussion. All right. So let's go to the news. Listen carefully, because this is what's happening in our world right now. Listen carefully.
Thousands in Minneapolis made their anger and their fury clear last night over the death of George Floyd, a black man who died in police custody. That sound from video from CNN. There you can hear police firing tear gas at protesters. It was the second night of protests, and these demonstrations turned deadly when one man was shot to death. Protesters there are seeking justice after video circulated of a white police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck. Floyd gasps for air, and then he dies. Holly Bailey is with the Washington Post, and she is on the ground there in Minneapolis. Holly, thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
You were out there on the streets last night. Protests had been actually going on all day. Can you describe what you saw?
Well, for most of the day, the protest had been peaceful. There have been several hundred people outside the third police precinct in South Minneapolis, a little bit south of downtown. And then suddenly the protests grew larger. Several thousand people showed up. Police were in riot gear. Some were positioned on top of the police building, firing tear gas and rubber bullets at the crowd to control it. And meanwhile, the neighborhood around the police station basically dissolved into chaos. There's several Target store and other retail stores where windows were broken out and looting began. By 10 o'clock last night, there were businesses on fire, and the protest had extended sort of out of that neighborhood. And I think there's a lot of people here fearing that this is just going to get worse.
I understand some of the protesters actually went to the home of one of the officers involved. Is that right?
Yeah, Derek Chauvin, who is the officer pictured in the video with his knee on George Floyd's neck. Their protesters went to his home in a suburb of Minneapolis. Several hundred people. They poured red paint on his driveway. Someone wrote "killer" on the garage door. And there were also protests outside the home of the county prosecutor here as people demand for this officer to be arrested.
What more can you tell us about the 4 officers who were fired?
What we know is that, Derek Chauvin and another officer, at least, had a history of being involved in altercations. That Chauvin had been involved in at least 2 involved shootings. And, that's a lot more that, people are looking into at this point. We only received the names of the latter two officers yesterday, and so there's a lot more, but they appear to be, they don't have as long of a time on the force as Chauvin did. But I expect we're going to be hearing more about that in coming days.
So the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, has been calling now for these officers to be arrested and charged, at least the primary officer involved. What is that going to happen? I mean, do we have any indication at this point if charges are coming?
Well, yesterday, state officials who are also running their own separate investigation sort of said that they want to see whatever action happen very quickly. One of the state officials compared it to the Eric Garner case, saying, this is not, they're going to act more swiftly than New York did on this. But a lot still has to happen in terms of the investigation. There still hasn't been a medical examiner investigation of George Floyd's body that needs to happen. And so there's a lot more that needs to happen before anybody's arrested.
All right, Holly Bailey with the Washington Post reporting from Minneapolis. Thanks very much. Thousands of people in the streets, a police precinct on fire, and more anger and more pain in Minneapolis over the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, the governor there, Tim Walz, has deployed the National Guard to try and quell a third day and night of protests. But last night, the Minneapolis Police Department's 3rd Precinct was overrun and set on fire. And protests were not limited to Minnesota. Demonstrations took place in Los Angeles, in New York, Denver, and several other cities. All are demanding justice after the death of Floyd, a black man who was seen in a video with a white officer's knee on his neck pleading for breath. He later died.
We've got NPR's Adrian Florido with us, who is in Minneapolis and was at the protests last night. Adrian, thanks for being here after a really difficult night. You, I understand, were there at the police precinct that was burning. Can you just describe what you saw?
Yeah, hi, Rachel. It was a remarkable scene. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, angry and defiant, but also celebrating. This police precinct over the last several days had sort of become a symbol of the police power that people feel is responsible for George Floyd's death, and also a symbol of the broader, tortured relationship between police and black Americans. And here was this building burning. And there was not a single police officer or firefighter on the scene. Officials just let the building burn. The mayor said in a late-night press conference that he had pulled personnel from the precinct because he hadn't wanted to risk more violence between police and protesters.
And what were the people who were there in that moment? What were they telling you?
Well, some people I spoke with were conflicted by what they were seeing, but by and large, people in this crowd were happy to see this police precinct burn. I spoke to a woman named Zamzam Vara, and I want you to listen to what she said.
That's what they get. Y'all knew better. Y'all knew the consequences of doing what y'all did. That's what you get, period. I don't feel bad for them. They don't feel bad for George?
I also spoke to a young man named Chavez Cook. Listen to him.
This is how our people react when, you know what I'm saying? When we've been done wrong for so long. So I'm just praying and hoping that everybody make it home safe.
Almost everyone I spoke with at this protest said that these protests have become about more than George Floyd. They are about this long history of police brutality. That said, people do still want the 4 officers involved in Floyd's death to be charged with murder.
Well, where's that at? I mean, federal and local prosecutors are investigating to determine if the officers should be charged. But what does that investigation entail?
Yeah, so after local and federal prosecutors announced a press conference yesterday, many people had hoped that they were going to announce arrests and charges. That did not happen. Instead, prosecutors came out and said they needed time to do an exhaustive investigation before deciding on charges. They did not give a time frame for that. And that was frustrating, and it angered a lot of people. And it may have motivated even more of them to come out into the streets last night.
Well, it's so interesting because you say that they just let that precinct burn, right? There's such an emphasis on not exacerbating the current tension between protesters and police, but I have to imagine that they're bracing for more protests.
Yeah, especially as protests spread across Minneapolis, St. Paul, other cities. other states. Last night, we saw this inflammatory tweet from President Trump in which he suggested that protesters could be shot. On the other hand, here in Minneapolis, the police pulled back. And so officials across the country will have to kind of grapple with how to deal with these protests if they continue to spread and escalate.
All right, NPR's Adrian Florido reporting from Minneapolis. Adrian, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
So we're going to turn to another protest now. This one happened in Louisville, Kentucky. Gunshots injured 7 people there last night.
Yeah, so demonstrators there were calling for justice for Breonna Taylor, the black woman shot and killed by white police officers during a raid in March. Taylor's family and the community still have not gotten answers about her death.
On the line from Louisville, we've got reporter Amina Alahi from member station WFPL. Amina, thanks for being here. You also were out in the protest there last night. What did you see?
Yes, good morning. We saw several hundred protesters initially congregating in a peaceful manner, moving from, different downtown hotspots, one to another. Over time, the crowd grew, the police arrived, they started putting on riot gear, and tension started to bubble over. As you mentioned, several people were shot, 7 in total confirmed by Louisville police tonight, last night at this point. And the latest update that we got from Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher is that 5 of those people are in good condition and 2 of them were sent to surgery. We don't yet know how those 2 have fared until now. What we do know, according to the police department, is that no officers fired their guns and all of the shooting victims were civilians themselves.
So these people were all out chanting the name of Breonna Taylor. Can you remind us about the details of this case?
Yes, Breonna Taylor was killed on March 13th, which feels like a long time ago, but her story has just reached national significance and attention in recent weeks. Her family sued the officers in the police department who were involved in the raid on her apartment. She was killed because they were conducting a no-knock raid in the middle of the night after midnight. And as they entered the apartment, Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, did not appear to be aware that the people coming in were police. Therefore, Kenneth Walker fired a warning shot at them, and they returned fire, more than 20 bullets, 8 of which struck Breonna, killing her. Just this week, a judge dismissed all charges against Kenneth Walker, who has maintained since the beginning that he was shooting in self-defense. And just yesterday, we got tape of the 911 call he made that night, in which it's clear that he does not know who has entered the apartment, and he's afraid and confused about why someone has just broken in and shot his girlfriend.
So now these protests over her death, a renewed call for justice. How are officials there responding?
Officials are responding with some policy changes. For example, attempts to limit how no-knock warrants are used, attempts to expand how and when body cameras are used, but they're not doing the thing that protesters are asking for, which is for the officers involved to be fired and charged in Breonna's death.
All right, reporter Amina Alahi in Louisville, Kentucky.
There you have the news. There you have what is happening in our world. We have some situations where clearly justice wasn't handed out. The police handled things in an incorrect situation. George Floyd, dead. Breonna Taylor, dead. These situations where you could say injustice occurred. That wasn't justice. That wasn't right. It was wrong. And as a result, people are responding to the injustice and protest. And these protests are turning violent. Businesses are being burnt to the ground. How many businesses? You can, well over 19. I was listening to a list of businesses that have been partially destroyed or completely destroyed in just Minnesota since all of this has started. And it was, I think it took the radio, the list. I think it almost took like 15 minutes to read the list. All of these businesses being destroyed, things being burnt down, and some of these businesses are owned by minorities. They're owned by African Americans, and their businesses are being destroyed. Now, yes, absolutely, we should be more upset over the death of a human being than the destruction of businesses. But what I want you to understand is this. Injustice was done, and they are responding to the injustice with fire, rioting, destruction, and how far is it going to spread? How many people, there's many cases looting, stealing things, how far this spreads, what are the consequences going to be? We could talk about it all day. And typically when this happens, you get into a big political argument. You can start discussing it from different perspectives. That's not what I want to do. I want to make sure I set this up carefully. Injustice was done. Okay, George Floyd was basically murdered, and it was, I mean, right now from the way it looks, I mean, there's no way to excuse that or justify it, and I think everyone agrees that that was horrible and it was wrong, and injustice occurred. Breonna Taylor, they come in, she's killed. We could get into a whole discussion about no-knock warrants, and we could get into there's so many different ways of looking at it and arguing about it, but all the other podcasts are arguing those angles. I want us to stop and go, okay, let's say in both cases, let's say injustice was done. Wrong was done. Now, how do you respond? How do you respond? Now, we could look at this, again, from a cultural perspective, from a political perspective, but I want us to take these events and I want us to step back. I want to look at it from a theological perspective, all right? In your Christian life and my Christian life, there are times where there is something happening. Maybe it's an injustice. Maybe it's a wrong. Maybe it's something we disagree with. But how do we respond? Do we respond with fire? Do we respond with fleshly anger? Do we respond in a fleshly way? Or are we to respond in a spiritual and biblical way? How many times something happens in your life? Listen, this can occur. There's so many different ways I could try to illustrate this, but so many times. Well, first, let's just step back and look at it from just the church at large. So many times something is happening in culture that maybe we don't like, something that we disagree with. But do we respond to it as the church at large in a spiritual way? Prayer, fasting? Are we utilizing spiritual weapons? Are we fighting it spiritually, or are we fighting and engaging the problems in a fleshly way? Are we, in a sense, engaging in burning things down? And again, I'm using that figuratively. Do we respond, in a sense, burning things down, fighting, throwing rocks, smashing windows? Do we respond in a very fleshly way, earthly way, worldly way? Or do we respond to injustice, to wrong, to something we don't like in a very biblical, very godly way? How do we respond? Now, that's from the church at large. Then you can break it down to your individual life. How do you respond as an individual when things go wrong? Sometimes there can be an actual wrong that occurs. There's an injustice. There is sin. There's something that is absolutely horrible, and we say that it's horrible and that it's wrong and that it bothers us. But how do we respond? There is the injustice, but what is the correct response? Now, I'm not going to get into all of the arguments about the protests and the riots. I'm just trying to look at it from a theological perspective, all right? I'm just trying to take that action, that these news reports of what's actually happening in our society, and I'm looking back, and when I started thinking about it from a spiritual perspective, I'm like, how many times have I responded with basically a fire, with smashing a rock through the window? And I'm talking about in a personal way, maybe even from a theological perspective. Sometimes our response isn't the way the Bible tells us to respond. The weapons of our warfare are not fleshly. It is spiritual, powerful through God for the pulling down of strongholds. We are to engage in a war, but we do so spiritually. We are to fight back, but we do so spiritually. We pray, we fast, we proclaim the word of God. We live out our Christian life. We are to be salt. We are to be light. How do we respond? I think so many times in the modern church, and if you look at the early church and the way they responded to so many wrongs and so many injustices and so many things that were happening, In many cases, it was radically different than the way we do. When things go wrong for Christians or we don't like something, we either turn to politics, we turn to, some inflammatory comments that we post on social media. We just immediately go at it from a very fleshly perspective. Figuratively speaking, we want to burn it down, smash the windows, and get upset and protest. We want to boycott this, protest this, shut this down, attack this. And it's like, wait. Where is the spiritual approach? Where is the godly approach? Let me give you a biblical example of an injustice and then the response to that injustice. You probably know the story. Genesis chapter 34. Genesis chapter 34. Genesis chapter 34, verse 1. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. All right, so we have Dinah. She's the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob. She went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. Right? Basically, what we have here is a rape. That is not justice. That is injustice. That is wrong. That is sin. That is a crime. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel and spake kindly unto the damsel. Now he takes her, violates her, but now he wants to, her to be his wife. Now we could look at this and go, man, that's kind of messed up. What is going on here? All right. And note what happened. Verse 4. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel and lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. Jacob's handling it is really bizarre. The two fathers are kind of like, hey, let's talk about this. What can we do? The brothers are like, wait, they're mad. They're upset. They're furious. Now, you can get to a whole discussion here. There's been all kinds of sermons. What is Jacob doing? Why is Jacob handling it this way? Do we see this kind of common with his character at times when he's always kind of scheming? He's always trying to come up with a plan. He's always trying to come up with an angle instead of sometimes reacting the way he's supposed to. A lot of times there's sermons here about him, his fathering style and all the problems with the way he sometimes acts as a father. We could go all day about that, but just please note there's something, injustice has occurred. And you've got two parties that are like, okay, we need to get together and discuss this. And you've got others involved going, wait a minute, we're ticked off. This is wrong. Now, how does the story develop? Verse 8, and Hamor communed with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give him to wife, and make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get your possessions therein. They want to make a deal. Hey, you know what? Let's just start working together. We can trade, daughters and for your sons and our daughters for your sons. And we can just make this all go away. Let's just work out a deal. Now you can sit there and go, this is insane. What is happening? You've got to remember, we're reading it. This is a historical narrative. It's not telling us here. It's obviously condemning him laying with her and taking her and defiling her. That is condemned. But the rest of the actions are just being described of what happened. There's a historical context to it. Okay, but just please understand why I'm drawing the correlation. An injustice occurred. You got some parties here, just let's negotiate. Let's try to figure it out. But you got some people in the background here who are not very happy. They're not very happy. They're very upset. Verse 11, and Shechem said unto her father and unto her brother, let me find grace in your eyes. What you shall say unto me, I will give. Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. All right. He wants Dinah. He wants her. Okay. Let's continue the story. Verse 13. Now a plan is going to get kind of, they come up with a plan here. Look carefully at how this develops. Genesis 34:13. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister, and they said unto them, we cannot do this thing to give our sisters to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this will you consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. Now remember, this is all a plan. This is all being done under the guise of deceit. They're going to use lying and going to use deceit to try to correct an injustice. There was an injustice, right? Some want to deal with it kind of like, let's just come up with a plan here that will benefit everybody. This is unfortunate, but let's try to come up with a plan that will benefit everyone. The brothers come up with a plan. Let's use some deceit. Let's use some deceit and lying, because we're going to use this to set everything up to get justice, to make this right. All right. Verse 17, but if ye will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And the young men deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city and communed with the men of their city, saying, these men are peaceable with us, therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein, for the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters for us to wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us, for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. So they're thinking, hey, this is going to be beneficial. We're going to have peace. We're going to have prosperity. We're all going to get along. Everybody's going to get a wife. Everything's going to be wonderful. Okay, all they asking us is to get circumcised. Let's do this. Now remember, this whole plan is being done deceitfully. This is all a lie. They're all setting them up. And I think you can see how they're being set up. All right. Verse 25. Here we go. And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword, came upon the city boldly, and slew all the males. One man violated their daughter. One man. They come in and kill everyone. They slaughter all the men. And they slew Hamor and Shechem, his son, at the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their asses, which that was in the city, and that was in the field, and all their wealth, and all their little ones and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. So they go and they respond to the injustice of their sister being defiled, right? They respond to that by killing all the men, taking all the wealth. They start looting, and they murder, they loot, and then they take the wives. They take everyone. They slaughter, kill, murder, and take. That's how they responded to the injustice. Now, this was all done in a very physical, literal way. I'm just asking spiritually. Sometimes we may not respond by physically killing. We may not respond by physically looting, but we respond in a fleshly way. We do not respond in a spiritual way. They took this and said, hey, you did wrong. Now we're going to respond and we're going to start killing and taking whatever we want. And they do so. And look at the response. Look at the response, verse 30 or 22. Only herein will the men consent. Go down to verse 30. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? Now, Jacob is more worried about what's going to happen to him. He's more concerned about what's going to happen to him. He's not too concerned at the fact that they killed all of these people and took all of these things. He's only concerned because it's going to make his life difficult. He doesn't seem too concerned that his daughter was defiled. It's just bizarre the way the whole story reads. Now, we'd have to go back in historical context. Obviously, this has a certain way the women are viewed, almost as property, and there's a lot of things about it that we obviously don't like. But what I want you to see from this story is it screams a lesson that injustice is done, and the way they responded went above and beyond, and they went after it in a very fleshly way. There was no there was no thought of God. There was no thought of a spiritual response. It was all done physically. And I'm just saying sometimes when we see the situation in Minnesota where an injustice is done and then it's rioting, looting, burning, people getting shot, all the things that are happening and all the protests in different locations, from Louisville to Minnesota, all the different places it's spreading, all the different situations that are occurring. Yes, there was injustice, but the response, you're burning down businesses that had nothing to do with it. You're burning down businesses in many cases owned by a minority. You're burning down businesses that probably employ minorities. You're actually hurting the community. You're not helping. You're not making your point. In fact, in some situations, what you're doing, your people are going to forget George Floyd. They're going to forget Breonna Taylor. They're going to forget the individuals that were killed, the individuals who were victims of injustice. And all people are going to focus on is the burning down of businesses and the rioting and the looting. And you're actually going to cause people to forget the victims of injustice. So you're not helping the situation. You're going to create a bigger problem. Now, again, we could talk about that, but I just want us to see again from a spiritual perspective. How many times in my Christian life there is an issue, there's a problem. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be a marital problem. It can be a problem at work. It can be an issue, and something wasn't right. Something was wrong. We don't like it, but our response is completely fleshly, completely worldly, and figuratively speaking, we're going in, killing everyone, taking everything. We're going in and burning everything down. There is a spiritual way to respond. We are not fighting a war against the flesh. We're fighting a spiritual war. We need spiritual armor. We need a spiritual mind. We need spiritual weapons, not carnal weapons, not fleshly weapons. And so many times when Christians look at the situations going on in the world, it doesn't matter if they don't like something about COVID-19, they don't like a rule about shutting churches down. We always tend to respond in the most political, ideological driven, fleshly, earthly way possible. And that's what the church needs to stop doing. When we see the buildings burn, we have to ask ourselves, how do we do that sometimes as the church and as Christians? How do we sometimes respond to an actual wrong, but we respond to the wrong in the most fleshly way possible? I've seen it in my own life. I've sometimes responded in a way that's not spiritual. I've seen times where maybe I did something wrong and the way other people responded was the most fleshly, ungodly, unspiritual way possible, which then actually, whenever you respond to, let's say if you're responding to someone's sin, and you respond to their sin in the most fleshly, ungodly way, then you take the focus off that person's sin and you almost turn them into a victim. That's not what you should do. Respond spiritually. If someone is overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual, restore such a one. It requires someone spiritual to handle someone falling into to sin. It's a spiritual approach. Over and over and over again, we see this. There's a fleshly way to respond, there's a worldly way to respond, and there's a spiritual way. There is a spiritual way to fight, there is a spiritual way to engage in a war, and there's a fleshly way. We don't respond in a fleshly way. We don't burn the buildings down. That's not the way we are to handle ourselves. The Bible is clear, and the Bible's way of handling things is so against our nature, right? How are we supposed to respond to our enemies according to the Bible? Love them. How are we supposed to respond when someone does something to us? Turn the other cheek. What if they compel us to go 2 miles? Wait. And remember, that's an unjust system. Any Roman official could come to anyone and say, you got to carry this a mile. You got to carry my armor a mile. You got to carry whatever a mile. And you were bound by law to do so. And Jesus says, don't protest it. Don't fight it. Don't, call for a boycott. Don't try to get a political leader in office that will change the law. He says, carry it 2 miles. And we read that and we're like, that's insane. Turn the other cheek. Love my enemy. Bless those who persecute me. This is the most insane system I've ever heard, because we overcome the world through spiritual means, through a spiritual perspective, by being salt, by being light. We don't respond spiritually speaking, by burning things down, by destroying things. I hope you can see the correlation there. Let me go to a very important passage. Book of Romans. And I hate that I had to go through that Genesis story so quick, and I couldn't take it all apart. But I just wanted you to at least see the narrative, how that plays out. There was an injustice done. There was. And then how did they respond to the injustice? Lying, deceit, killing, taking. Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one towards another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own eyes. Now here we go, verse 17. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink, for in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. And then, going into chapter 13, now we have let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. No matter how pagan the higher powers are, no matter how evil the higher powers are, we submit to them. We don't fight them with fire. We don't fight them with riots. We don't fight them with looting. We overcome evil with good. I really want you to take Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 21, and take that apart and really think about everything, that if we were to live our life that way, Romans chapter 12, 9 through 21 is a spiritual response. That is a supernatural spiritual response. Everything in Romans 12, 9 through 21, that goes against everything in your nature. That goes against everything in my nature. You know how we want to respond to things? We want to respond to things like the protesters in Minnesota and Louisville. We want to burn everything down. We want to smash windows. We want to take. We want to do what the brothers did in Genesis. We want to lie and come up with a plan so that we can pay them back. We can kill, maybe not physically, okay, but I'm saying in a spiritual way, we respond in the most fleshly way possible. And you see this all over the place. You see this all over the place. And Christians saying some of the most absurd things, even in regards to the situation in Minnesota. It's like, it's just, I won't get into all the things Christians are saying, but it's just ridiculous that it's such a fleshly talk. It's so political. It's so ideological. He's like, where are the words of Christ? Where is love to your enemy? Where is responding to evil with good? Where is the idea of overcoming evil with good? Loving, blessing those that curse you, loving them, doing all of these good things. Take to your enemy food and drink. To your enemy, you take food and drink. In other words, this would be crazy. But in a spiritual perspective, if we were to try to live that out in real life, if a cop does some horrible crime, yes, we want the law to jump in and we want the law to punish because it should, but we would respond by showing love. We would respond by giving them food and drink. And that seems like the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard. It sounds foolish. Can you imagine that picture? Here's all of these people show up. Yes, we want the law to do its part. We want the law to do its job because that's what the law is there, is to punish evil. This person did something wrong, but we're going to respond personally with love, with food, with drink. We'll actually give to this person who did the injustice. We will heap burning coals on their head because we are going to demonstrate love. We're going to demonstrate compassion. We're going to demonstrate forgiveness. We're going to demonstrate mercy. Can you imagine what that would look like on the news? The news wouldn't even know what to do. They would be waiting for the buildings to burn and no, they're coming to feed the police. They're coming to give to the police. They're coming to give drink, and they would be like, what is going on? This is the most, because that's not fleshly. That would be supernatural. That's spiritual. Now, all I'm saying is there's millions of situations that you encounter and I encounter where the world does something or something happens in our life, and we have to stop and go, what's the spiritual way to respond? What's the spiritual way to respond? I fall short of that a million times a day. I fall short. You fall short. The church falls short. That's why Christianity we're not saved based off what we do. We're saved based off what Christ has done. But just remember, whenever we look at what's happening in the world, whenever we're looking at what's going on in the world, whenever we're looking at what's going on in our own life, please, and I'll end with this, remember this. Think about how God responded to us. We were the criminals. We were the murderers. We were the sinners. We deserve nothing but punishment, nothing but hell. We deserve fire. We deserve fire. We deserve the eternal wrath of God. That's what you deserve and that's what I deserve. But what did God do? In due time, he sent his only begotten Son, who came and then fulfilled all of the laws that we were violating and breaking and that we don't care about and all the things we were done. And then he, listen, innocent, pure, holy, second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son of God, came, and for you, the criminal, the one that should be drug off to jail and executed, you, the murderer, you, the criminal, you, the thief, you, the adulterer, okay, all of us are guilty, and when you break one commandment, you're guilty of all. You've broken all of them 1,000,000 times over in thought, word, and deed by what you've done and what you've left undone. Here comes Christ, and instead of coming to you and throwing rocks and grabbing you and dragging you off so that you can be punished, and no, he says, listen, he tells the crowd, stop. I will suffer for the guilty. I will suffer. I will take the fire. I will take the punishment. I will take the execution. I will take the punishment. And then Christ died on your behalf. He handled our crimes in a completely supernatural way. He died for us. Now that's how we are to live. We are to respond to all the things happening in the most godly and spiritual way, which turns it upside down. We don't respond with rocks and fire. We don't respond in a fleshly way. We respond in a supernatural way. And again, I'm not saying what the rioters should or shouldn't do. I'm just using this as an illustration for how we should respond spiritually. Now, for Christians, we are to respond in a very literal way by turning the other cheek, loving the enemy, feeding, bringing food to our enemy, bringing drink to our enemy, blessing them, not cursing them. That goes against everything in my nature. My nature says fight. My nature says strike. My nature says kill. My nature says destroy. You step to me, I'm taking you down. That's my nature. The Bible's like, whoa. No. You got to see this from a spiritual perspective. God is supposed to change our perspective. And I think that sometimes Christians run around like we're rioters. Now, we may not burn, and we may not throw physical rocks, and we may not burn buildings down physically and loot, but we handle things in a fleshly way. That's the point I'm trying to get across. All right, I'll stop right there. You can email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. God bless.